The blood-red sunset cast long shadows over Murphy's, California, as Georgina Adams clutched her threadbare shawl tightly around her trembling shoulders. The year was 1858, and at 18 years old, she had never felt more alone or terrified than she did at this moment, standing outside the Rusty Nail saloon while her uncle gambled away what little they had left. Georgina had been living with her Uncle Frank since her parents died of fever 3 years ago. What had once been a reluctant act of family duty on his part had devolved into resentment as his fortunes dwindled and his thirst for whiskey grew. Tonight was different, though. She could feel it in the pit of her stomach as she peered through the grimy saloon window, watching him lose hand after hand of poker. "Girl, get in here." Frank's voice boomed through the batwing doors. Humiliation burned Georgina's cheeks as every eye in the establishment turned to her. She stepped inside, the reek of cheap whiskey, sweat, and tobacco smoke assaulting her senses. The floorboards creaked beneath her worn boots as she made her way to her uncle's table. "This is my niece," Frank slurred, gesturing sloppily toward her. "Pretty thing, ain't she?" The men around the table leered at her, their gazes lingering uncomfortably on her slender form. Despite her simple dress and lack of finery, Georgina's natural beauty was undeniable. Her honey gold hair fell in waves down her back, framing delicate features and intelligent green eyes that now widened with growing horror as she realized what was happening. "Uncle Frank," she whispered urgently, "we should go home." "Can't," he muttered, not meeting her eyes. "I'm in too deep." The saloon owner, a balding man with a greedy gleam in his eye, stepped forward. "Your uncle owes me $80, miss. Been running a tab for months now, and tonight he promised to settle up." "We don't have that kind of money," Georgina protested. The saloon owner smirked. "Your uncle seems to think otherwise. He's offered something else as payment." The sickening realization of what her uncle had done crashed over Georgina like ice water. "No," she breathed, backing away. "You can't be serious." Frank wouldn't look at her. "It's just for a while, Georgie. Till I get back on my feet. Mr. Dawson here says you can work for him, pay off my debt." "Work," Georgina spat the word. Everyone knew what kind of work young women did in places like this. "You're selling me to pay for your whiskey." Now," the saloon owner said with mock gentleness. "No need to make a scene. $80 is a fair price for a girl your age with all her teeth." Georgina felt the room spin. This couldn't be happening. Not here in Murphy's, where she had grown up, where her parents' graves lay just beyond the town limits. Her legs weakened beneath her, and she gripped the edge of a nearby table to steady herself. It was at that moment the batwing doors swung open with force, and a tall figure stepped into the saloon. The din quieted as the newcomer surveyed the room with piercing blue eyes. He moved with the casual confidence of a man accustomed to danger, his sun-bronzed face partially shadowed by the brim of his dusty Stetson. Georgina had never seen him before, but everyone else seemed to recognize the stranger. He wore simple trail clothes, a blue shirt under a worn leather vest, denim pants tucked into scuffed boots, and a gun belt sitting low on his hips. There was nothing flashy about him, yet he commanded attention without effort. "Mr. Evans," the saloon owner greeted, suddenly all smiles. "Didn't expect to see you back in Murphy's so soon." "Dawson." The stranger nodded curtly. "Just passing through." His voice was deep and measured with a hint of a Texas drawl. The man Evans stepped to the bar and ordered whiskey, seemingly oblivious to the tense scene he had interrupted. But as he raised the glass to his lips, his gaze settled on Georgina and the tears streaming silently down her face. "What's going on here?" he asked, his tone casual but his eyes sharp. "Just business," the saloon owner replied. "This gentleman's settling his debt with an alternative payment." Evans set his glass down deliberately. Is that so? He looked at Frank, who squirmed uncomfortably under his steady gaze. You're selling this young woman, my niece, Frank mumbled. Just until I can. How much? Evans cut him off. $80, Dawson answered proudly. The stranger's expression remained impassive as he reached inside his vest and pulled out a leather wallet. I'll give you $160. He counted out the bills and placed them on the bar with a decisive thump. Double what he owes. Dawson's eyes widened at the stack of money. Well now, that's mighty generous, but I've been needin' a new girl to help around here, and she's not for sale. Evan's voice had dropped to a dangerous quiet. Not to you. Not to anyone. The saloon grew so silent Georgina could hear the ticking of the clock behind the bar. The stranger picked up the money and walked over to Frank, dropping it in front of him. Pay your debt and leave town, he said, his voice cold with contempt. I don't ever want to see your face in Murphy's again. Frank grabbed the money with shaking hands, peeled off enough to pay the saloon owner, and scrambled toward the door without a backward glance at Georgina. Uncle Frank, she called out, more from shock than any desire to follow him. He paused at the doorway, shame briefly flickering across his face. Sorry, Georgie, you're better off without me anyway. Then he was gone, leaving her alone among strangers. The saloon erupted in murmurs as Georgina stood frozen, trying to comprehend what had just happened. The stranger Evans approached her slowly, as one might approach a frightened deer. Miss, he said, removing his hat. I'm Kieran Evans. I'd like to offer you safe passage to wherever you'd like to go. Georgina stared at him, her mind reeling. This man had just spent a small fortune to prevent her being sold like cattle, yet she knew nothing about him or his intentions. Why? She managed to ask. His expression softened slightly. Because no person should ever be treated as property. I have a wagon outside. I can take you to the nearest Women's Aid Society, or if you have family elsewhere. I don't, Georgina interrupted. I have no one now. Something flickered in Kieran Evans' eyes, recognition, perhaps, of a shared loneliness. Then I suggest we leave this place and figure out what comes next. Georgina hesitated, glancing around at the curious faces watching them. She had lived in Murphy's her whole life, but in this moment, there seemed nothing left for her here but humiliation and bitter memories. All right, Mr. Evans, she said, summoning what dignity she could. I accept your offer of transportation. As they stepped out into the night air, Georgina felt oddly light-headed. The stars above seemed too bright, the street too quiet. Her entire life had just been upended in the space of minutes. I realize you have no reason to trust me, Kieran said as he helped her into his wagon. But I give you my word, you're safe. Your word means little to me, Mr. Evans, as we are strangers, Georgina replied honestly. But I have precious few options at present, and you did prevent. What was happening back there? She studied him in the moonlight. Are you some kind of lawman? A ghost of a smile touched his lips. No, madam, just a rancher passing through on business. A rancher with enough money to throw away $160 on a strange woman's virtue. I wouldn't call it throwing away, he said, climbing up beside her and taking the reins. And I have a particular dislike for men who trade in human lives. They traveled in silence through the sleeping town, past the church, where Georgina had attended services every Sunday of her life, past the schoolhouse where she had learned her letters, and toward the outskirts where Kieran had apparently made camp earlier. A small fire still glowed, and beside it was not just a bedroll but a proper tent. His horse, a magnificent chestnut gelding, was tethered nearby alongside the mules that pulled his wagon. You can have the tent, Kieran said as he helped her down. I'll sleep by the fire. Georgina stood awkwardly, clutching her shawl. Mr. Evans, I'm grateful for your intervention, truly, but I don't understand what happens now. Where will you take me tomorrow? Kieran added wood to the fire, the flames illuminating his thoughtful expression. That depends on what you want, Miss Adams. Georgina Adams, he nodded. Miss Adams, I'm headed north to my ranch near Sacramento. I can take you that direction, or if there's somewhere else you'd prefer. I have nowhere else, Georgina admitted, the reality of her situation sinking in fully. My parents are buried here. I've never been farther than 10 miles from Murphy's, and now I own nothing but the clothes I'm wearing. Kieran considered her words. I employ a housekeeper at my ranch, elderly widow named Mrs. Finch. She could use help, and you'd have a proper room and wages. He held up a hand as she began to respond. It's an honest job, Miss Adams. Nothing unseemly. Georgina studied him, trying to gauge his character. He was handsome in a weathered way, perhaps 30 years old, with lines at the corners of his eyes that spoke of squinting into the sun rather than from laughter. There was something solid about him that inspired confidence, yet he remained a complete mystery. Why help me at all? She asked finally. Kieran stared into the fire. 5 years ago, my sister was in a situation not unlike yours. Her husband gambled away everything they had, then tried to settle his debts by offering her to his creditors. His voice hardened. I wasn't there to stop it. By the time I found her, the damage was done. She took her own life a month later. Georgina's hand flew to her mouth. I'm so sorry. He nodded once, accepting her sympathy. So when I saw what was happening tonight, I couldn't stand by. They sat in silence as the fire crackled between them. Finally, Georgina spoke. I accept your offer of employment, Mr. Evans. I have skills that might be useful. I can cook, clean, and I've kept accounts for my uncle's carpentry business since I was 15. Good, Kieran said. We'll start north tomorrow. He handed her a blanket. You should rest. It's been a difficult night. Inside the tent, Georgina lay awake for hours, her mind churning with all that had transpired. Her uncle's betrayal cut deep, yet somehow the greater shock was the sudden appearance of this stranger who had changed her fate with such swift decisiveness. She had no idea what awaited her at Kieran Evans' ranch, but as exhaustion finally pulled her towards sleep, she realized it was the first time in years she faced tomorrow with something resembling hope. The journey north began at dawn. Georgina had slept fitfully, but woke feeling surprisingly resolute. Whatever lay ahead, she was determined to face it with courage. Her life in Murphy's was over. Perhaps it had ended the moment her parents died, and she had simply been going through the motions ever since. Kieran had coffee brewing when she emerged from the tent. He offered her a tin cup without comment, then went about breaking camp with practiced efficiency. I have some bread and jerky for breakfast, he said. Nothing fancy. It's more than enough, Georgina replied. Thank you. They ate quickly, and Georgina helped pack away the cooking implements. When they were nearly ready to depart, Kieran hesitated. Is there anywhere in town you'd like to stop before we leave? To collect belongings or say goodbyes? Georgina considered the small cabin she had shared with her uncle. There was little there worth retrieving: a few dresses, her mother's hairbrush, a Bible. But the thought of possibly encountering Frank again made her stomach turn. There's just one place, she said quietly. Kieran nodded understanding when she directed him to the small cemetery on the hill overlooking town. He waited respectfully by the wagon while Georgina knelt between her parents' graves. I have to leave, she whispered, touching the simple wooden crosses. I don't think I'll be back. But I'll remember everything you taught me, she swallowed hard. I'll try to make you proud. When she returned to the wagon, her eyes were dry, her chin held high. Kieran helped her up without comment, and they set off on the road north, leaving Murphy's behind. The first day of travel passed in relative silence. Georgina found herself studying her companion when he wasn't looking, the confident way he handled the team, the alertness in his posture, the occasional softening around his mouth when they passed a particularly beautiful vista. He was not what she would call sociable, but neither was he unkind. He seemed simply accustomed to his own company. As evening approached, Kieran guided the wagon off the main road toward a stream where they could make camp. "We're making good time," he told her as he unhitched the team. "Should reach the ranch in 4 days if the weather holds." "What is your ranch like?" Georgina asked, realizing she knew almost nothing about her destination. "It's called Evergreen," he replied. 500 acres, mostly cattle, good water, decent grazing. I've been building it up for 7 years now." There was a touch of pride in his voice. "The house is nothing grand, 4 bedrooms, a proper kitchen. Mrs. Finch keeps it running while I'm away." "And do you have family there?" Georgina ventured, suddenly wondering if he might have a wife waiting. "No." His answer was short but not sharp. "Just the hands 4 men who work the herd and Mrs. Finch." Georgina nodded, oddly relieved. "I look forward to meeting Mrs. Finch. She's a good woman. Talks more than I do, which isn't saying much." The corner of his mouth twitched in what might have been the beginning of a smile. "She'll be glad for the company." They established a routine over the next few days. Kieran would wake first and have coffee ready by the time Georgina emerged from the tent. They would break their fast, pack up camp, and travel until midday when they'd stop briefly to rest the animals and eat a simple meal. Then they'd continue until dusk, when they'd find a suitable camping spot for the night. Gradually, the silence between them grew comfortable rather than awkward. Georgina began to ask questions about ranching, about the towns they passed through, about the changing landscape as they traveled north. Kieran answered patiently, and occasionally asked questions of his own about her life in Murphy's, careful to avoid mention of her uncle. On the 3rd night, as they sat by the campfire after supper, Georgina found herself sharing more than she had intended. "My father was the town carpenter," she said, watching the flames dance. "He taught me to love the smell of fresh-cut wood and the satisfaction of making something with your hands. My mother thought it improper for a girl to spend so much time in a workshop, but she indulged us both." "What did you make?" Kieran asked. Georgina smiled at the memory. "Small things, at first a box for my mother's sewing notions, a stepping stool for the kitchen. As I got older, I helped with furniture. I was quite good at the detail work, the finishing." She looked down at her hands, calloused in ways unusual for a young woman. "After they died, Uncle Frank took over the carpentry business, but he had neither the skill nor the interest to make it thrive." "You have a craftsman's eyes," Kieran observed. "I noticed how you study things, the joinery of the wagon, the harness repairs." Georgina looked up, surprised. "You're very observant," he shrugged. "Comes with living most of my life outdoors. You learn to notice details." "Is that how you became successful?" she asked. "By noticing what others missed?" Kieran considered the question seriously. "Partly. But mostly through hard work and some good fortune in the beginning." He paused. "I came west with nothing 10 years ago, worked cattle drives, saved every penny. When gold was discovered at Sutter's Mill, I didn't rush to the diggings like everyone else. Instead, I bought land while prices were low and started supplying beef to the mining camps." "That was clever," Georgina said admiringly. "Just practical. More fortunes have been lost looking for gold than ever were made finding it." He poked at the fire with a stick. "The steady path may be slower, but it's surer." Georgina thought about his words long after they had retired for the night. Kieran Evans was a man who valued stability, who built things to last. It made his impulsive rescue of her, all the more intriguing it seemed at odds with his measured approach to life. The next day brought their first challenge. Dark clouds had been gathering since morning, and by early afternoon, rain began to fall in heavy sheets. "There's a way station about 5 miles ahead," Kieran shouted over the downpour. "We can seek shelter there." The rain turned the road to mud, slowing their progress considerably. Georgina held her shawl over her head, but it offered little protection. Soon she was soaked to the skin and shivering. Kieran noticed, and somehow managed to free his coat without releasing the reins, draping it around her shoulders despite her protests. By the time they reached the way station, little more than a sturdy barn with an attached room for travelers' darkness was falling. Several other wagons had already taken refuge there, and the cramped interior was filled with damp, weary travelers. The station keeper, a grizzled old man with a permanent scowl, grudgingly agreed to let them stay for $1. "You can put your animals in the barn," he told Kieran. "Got space in the corner for you and your wife to bed down." "She's not," Kieran began, but Georgina laid a hand on his arm. "Thank you," she said to the station keeper. "We're grateful for the shelter." When the man moved away to deal with another arrival, Kieran raised an eyebrow at her. "It's simpler this way," Georgina explained quietly. "A man traveling with an unmarried young woman raises questions." "I'd rather avoid unwanted attention." Kieran nodded, understanding her reasoning. "I'll get the team settled." The night proved challenging in ways neither had anticipated. The station room was overcrowded, the air thick with the smell of wet wool and bodies. Georgina and Kieran claimed their small corner, spreading their blankets side by side out of necessity rather than choice. As they lay in the dim light, painfully aware of each other's proximity, Georgina whispered, "Tell me about your home. It helps to have something pleasant to think about." Kieran was quiet so long she thought he might have fallen asleep. Then his deep voice came softly through the darkness. "The house sits on a gentle rise overlooking a valley. In spring, wildflowers carpet the meadow's purple lupine, orange poppies, blue bells. The creek that runs through the property has deep pools where trout flash silver when they jump. From the front porch, you can watch the sun set behind the western ridge, turning the sky to fire." His description painted such a vivid picture that Georgina could almost see it. "It sounds beautiful." "It is," he said simply. "Even more so because I built most of it myself. You must miss it when you're away." "Yes." There was something wistful in that single syllable. "It's not right for a home to stand empty so often." Georgina turned her head slightly to look at his profile in the dimness. "Then why do you travel?" "A rancher's business takes him away sometimes. Cattle sales, supply purchases." He paused. "And I'm still learning, always trying to improve the operation. That means seeing how others do things, finding better methods." "You're dedicated," Georgina observed. "Stubborn," Mrs. Finch would say. There was warmth in his voice when he mentioned the housekeeper. "Both qualities have their merits," Georgina said, stifling a yawn. The rhythm of the rain on the roof was making her eyelids heavy. "Sleep," Kieran said gently. "Tomorrow will be better weather, according to the station keeper." Georgina closed her eyes, feeling strangely safe despite the roomful of strangers. "Good night, Mr. Evans." "Kieran," he corrected softly. "I think given our supposed marital status, you might call me by my Christian name." A small smile touched her lips. "Good night, Kieran." "Good night, Georgina." The next morning dawned clear and bright. They set out early, eager to make up for lost time. The washed landscape had a fresh, vibrant quality that lifted Georgina's spirits. For the first time since leaving Murphy's, she found herself humming softly as they traveled. "That's a pretty tune," Kieran commented. Georgina flushed slightly. "My mother used to sing it while she worked. I hadn't thought of it in years." You have a nice voice." The simple compliment warmed her more than it should have. "Thank you. My father always said I sang like a meadowlark, though I suspect he was biased." "Fathers often are," Kieran agreed, "but that doesn't mean they're wrong." They continued on, the miles passing more quickly as they talked with growing ease. Georgina learned that Kieran had grown up in Missouri, the son of a farmer who had lost everything in a drought. He'd headed west at 20, working his way across the country until he found the place that felt like home. In turn, she told him about her childhood in Murphy's, her mother's herb garden, her father's workshop. It was nearly sunset when Kieran pointed ahead. "Just over that ridge you'll get your first view of Evergreen." As their wagon crested the hill, Georgina caught her breath. Below them stretched a verdant valley, golden in the late afternoon light. A creek wound through pastureland where cattle grazed in scattered groups. And there on a gentle rise stood a handsome two-story house with a wide porch, exactly as Kieran had described it. "Oh," she said softly, "it's lovely." Something like pleasure flickered across Kieran's face. "It's home." They descended into the valley, and as they approached the house, the front door opened. A small, round woman with silver hair twisted into a neat bun hurried onto the porch, waving energetically. "Mrs. Finch," Kieran explained unnecessarily, a genuine smile warming his features. The wagon had barely stopped when Mrs. Finch bustled down the steps, beaming. "Mr. Evans, you're back earlier than we expected, and you've brought company." Her keen eyes took in Georgina with undisguised curiosity. "Mrs. Finch, this is Miss Georgina Adams," Kieran said, helping Georgina down from the wagon. "She'll be assisting you with the household duties." "Oh, thank heavens!" Mrs. Finch exclaimed, taking Georgina's hands in hers. "These old bones aren't what they used to be, and this place is too much for one person to manage properly." "You're most welcome, my dear." Georgina warmed to the older woman immediately. "Thank you. I'm grateful for the opportunity." "Mr. Evans," a deep voice called. A tall, lean man with a weather-beaten face approached from the direction of the barn, followed by two younger men. "Didn't expect you back so soon." "Jackson," Kieran greeted his foreman. "Change of plans. How are things?" As the men fell into conversation about ranch matters, Mrs. Finch linked her arm through Georgina's. "Come along, dear. You must be exhausted from the journey. Let me show you to your room, and then we'll see about getting some hot food into you." The house was as welcoming inside as out, simply furnished, but with quality pieces that spoke of Kieran's craftsmanship. Wide windows let in ample light, and colorful rag rugs brightened the polished wood floors. Mrs. Finch led Georgina upstairs to a pleasant bedroom with a view of the valley. "This will be your room," she said. "Bath's at the end of the hall. I've kept a kettle on so you can wash up before supper." She patted Georgina's arm. "Take your time, dear. I'll have food ready when you come down." Left alone, Georgina stood in the middle of the room, overwhelmed by the sudden shift in her circumstances. A week ago, she had been living in a cramped cabin with an uncle who saw her as a burden. Now she was in this beautiful home with a job and a room of her own. All because a stranger had refused to let her be sold like property. After washing away the dust of travel and changing into her cleanest dress, woefully inadequate for her new position, she realized Georgina made her way downstairs. The aroma of home cooking led her to a spacious kitchen where Mrs. Finch was putting the finishing touches on what looked like a feast. "There you are, feeling better," the housekeeper beamed. "Sit down, dear. The men are washing up and will join us shortly." "Can I help with anything?" Georgina offered. "Not tonight. Tomorrow we'll go over your duties, but tonight you're still a guest." Mrs. Finch bustled around the table, setting out plates. Mr. Evans told me a little about how you came to be here. Just the basics, mind you. He's not one for gossip. Georgina tensed, wondering exactly what Kieran had shared. Mrs. Finch noticed her discomfort and patted her shoulder reassuringly. Don't fret, dear. All he said was that you needed a position and had excellent domestic skills. Your past is your own business. She lowered her voice. We've all had our trials in this life. This is a good place for fresh starts. Before Georgina could respond, boots sounded in the hallway and Kieran entered with Jackson and the other ranch hands. Cleaned up from their day's work, they nodded respectfully to the women. Dinner was a lively affair, with the men discussing ranch business and Mrs. Finch keeping up a steady stream of local news. Georgina spoke little, taking in the easy camaraderie around the table. Kieran, she noticed, was different here, still quiet compared to the others, but more relaxed, occasionally smiling at a joke or adding a dry comment of his own. After the meal, the hands retired to their quarters in a bunkhouse near the barn, leaving Georgina, Mrs. Finch, and Kieran in the kitchen. As Georgina automatically began helping with the dishes, Kieran cleared his throat. I hope you'll be comfortable here, Miss Adams, he said formally. Mrs. Finch will show you the routine tomorrow. Your wages will be $15 a month with room and board provided. Sundays are yours to do as you please. That's very generous, Georgina said, surprised by the amount. It was more than she had expected. It's fair for the work, he replied. I understand you've had a trying time recently. If there's anything you need to make your situation more comfortable, please don't hesitate to ask. His formality confused her after the relative ease that had grown between them during their journey. But perhaps he felt it necessary to establish proper boundaries now that they had reached his home. Thank you, Mr. Evans, she responded in kind. I appreciate your consideration. He nodded once and bid them good night, disappearing toward what she assumed was his study. Mrs. Finch chuckled as she dried a plate. He's always like that, proper as a schoolmaster when he's uncomfortable. Uncomfortable, Georgina echoed. Having a young, unmarried woman in his house, Mrs. Finch explained. He's worried about appearances, your reputation. That's why he made sure I knew you'd be coming before he brought you here. She studied Georgina thoughtfully. He must think highly of you. Mr. Evans doesn't usually involve himself in other people's troubles. He said I reminded him of his sister, Georgina said quietly. Mrs. Finch's expression softened. Ah, poor Rebecca, such a tragedy. She shook her head. Well, that explains it then. He couldn't save her, so he saved you instead. Georgina frowned slightly. Was that all she was to Kieran, a substitute for the sister he couldn't help? The thought bothered her more than it should have. The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity as Georgina settled into life at Evergreen. Under Mrs. Finch's patient guidance, she learned the rhythms of the household, when to bake bread, which day was best for laundry, how Mr. Evans preferred his shirts ironed. She threw herself into the work, grateful for the structured days and peaceful nights. Kieran himself was often absent from the house, spending long days out on the range with his men. When he was present for meals or in the evenings, he was unfailingly polite but maintained a careful distance. Georgina tried to respect his reserve, though she sometimes missed the man who had talked with her so openly by their campfire. As spring deepened into summer, Georgina gradually made the position her own. She took over much of the cooking, discovered she had a talent for preserving the bounty from the kitchen garden, and even began assisting Mrs. Finch with the household accounts. You have a good head for figures, the older woman commented one afternoon as they balanced the monthly expenses. My father taught me, Georgina replied. He said a woman should understand money matters in case she ever found herself alone in the world. She smiled wryly. He was right, though I doubt this was the situation he envisioned. Mrs. Finch patted her hand. Your father sounds like a wise man. And you've landed on your feet, haven't you? Mr. Evans thinks very highly of your work. He said something. Georgina tried to sound merely curious rather than eager for the information. Not in so many words, Mrs. Finch admitted with a knowing smile. But I've worked for him 7 years. I can tell when he's pleased. He's commented twice on your apple pie, and for a man of few words, that's practically a sonnet. Georgina laughed, though she couldn't deny the small thrill of pleasure at knowing Kieran had noticed her efforts. One evening in late July, Georgina was sitting alone on the front porch, enjoying the cooler air after a scorching day. She had brought out some mending, but the spectacular sunset had distracted her from her task. Mind if I join you? Kieran's voice startled her from her reverie. Of course not, she replied, setting aside her sewing. It's your porch. He settled into the chair beside hers, his tall frame relaxing visibly as he stretched out his long legs. Finest view in the valley, he commented, gesturing toward the fiery sky. It's beautiful, Georgina agreed. Exactly as you described it that night at the way station. Kieran glanced at her, surprised. You remember that, of course. It was what made me eager to see Evergreen for myself. She hesitated, then added, Your description didn't do it justice, though. It's even lovelier than I imagined. A pleased expression crossed his face. I'm glad you think so. He was quiet for a moment, then said, Mrs. Finch tells me you've taken on most of the cooking duties. I enjoy it, Georgina said, and Mrs. Finch's joints pain her when she stands too long at the stove. She also mentioned you've reorganized the pantry and taken over the household accounts. Georgina tensed slightly. I hope I haven't overstepped. Not at all, he assured her. I've never seen the place run more smoothly. Mrs. Finch seems happier than she's been in years, having someone to share the work. They fell into a comfortable silence, watching as the last rays of sunlight faded from the sky. Fireflies began to dance in the gathering dusk, their tiny lights blinking on and off across the lawn. When I was a child, Georgina said softly, I believed fireflies were stars that had fallen to earth and were trying to find their way back to the sky. Kieran smiled, a genuine smile that transformed his serious face. What did your parents say to that? My mother told me they were fairies with lanterns. My father said they were beetles with chemical reactions in their abdomens. She laughed at the memory. I preferred my own explanation. As would I, Kieran agreed. It's more poetic. Georgina looked at him with new interest. Do you enjoy poetry, Mr. Evans? He seemed almost embarrassed. I keep a few books, nothing scholarly, mind you, just some verses that speak to me. Would you? Georgina hesitated, then forged ahead. Would you show me sometime? I have little formal education, but I've always loved reading. Kieran regarded her thoughtfully. I'd be happy to share my modest library with you, Miss Adams. Georgina, she corrected gently. After all this time, I think we might dispense with formalities, at least in private conversation. His expression softened. Georgina, then. He rose from his chair. I have some correspondence to attend to, but perhaps tomorrow evening, if you're free, I could show you those books. I'd like that very much, she replied, her heart beating a little faster at the prospect. True to his word, the following evening after dinner, Kieran led Georgina to his study, a room she had cleaned but never lingered in out of respect for his privacy. Now, invited in properly, she took in the details. The substantial desk by the window, the comfortable leather chair, the glass-fronted bookcase filled with volumes. Kieran moved to the bookcase and opened it, running his fingers along the spines. Not much compared to a proper library, but they've been good companions on winter nights. Georgina approached, scanning the titles with interest. History, practical manuals on animal husbandry and agriculture, a few novels, and yes, several volumes of poetry Wordsworth, Tennyson, Burns. May I? She asked, reaching for a slim volume. Please. He gestured for her to take it. She opened the book carefully, a collection by Robert Burns, and was surprised to find annotations in the margins in a firm, slanting hand that she recognized from the household accounts as Kieran's. "You've studied these closely," she observed. "Not studied exactly, just considered." He looked slightly self-conscious. "I find Burns speaks plainly about complex things. I appreciate that." Georgina turned the pages, pausing at one that was particularly marked up. "A red, red rose," she read. "One of my father's favorites." She began to recite softly. "Oh, my Louvre is like a red, red rose that's newly sprung in June. Oh, my Louvre is like the melody that's sweetly played in tune." She looked up to find Kieran watching her intently, an unreadable expression in his blue eyes. "You know it by heart," he said quietly. "My father would recite it to my mother on their anniversary each year." She closed the book gently. "They had a good marriage, not without difficulties, but founded on true affection and respect. I always hope to find the same." "And yet your uncle almost sold you to a saloon keeper," Kieran said, his voice hardening at the memory. "Yes." Georgina set the book down. "I've never properly thanked you for what you did that night." "No thanks necessary," he said gruffly. "Nevertheless, I am deeply grateful." She met his eyes directly. "You changed the course of my life, Mr. Kieran. I can never repay such a debt." "There is no debt," he insisted. "I did what any decent man would do." "We both know that's not true," Georgina said gently. "Many decent men stood in that saloon and said nothing." Kieran looked away, uncomfortable with her gratitude. "You've more than earned your place here with your hard work." "If anyone should be grateful, it's me. The ranch hasn't run this well since, well, ever." Georgina accepted the change of subject. "I'm glad to hear it. I've come to care for Evergreen very much." Something in her tone made him look at her sharply. "You're happy here, then?" "You don't regret coming?" "Not for a moment," she assured him. "It's become home in a way I never expected." The word home seemed to hang in the air between them. Kieran cleared his throat. "I'm glad," he said simply. From that evening on, a new ease grew between them. Kieran no longer seemed to avoid being alone with Georgina, and their conversations gradually deepened beyond ranch matters. They discovered a shared love of music. Kieran admitted to playing the harmonica, though he refused her requests for a demonstration, and an appreciation for the natural world. One Sunday afternoon in August, Kieran surprised Georgina by asking if she'd like to ride out to see some of the more distant parts of the ranch. "I'd love to," she replied eagerly. "But I don't ride." "The buggy, then," he suggested. "There's a spot by the upper creek I think you'd enjoy. We could bring a picnic lunch." Mrs. Finch was all too happy to pack a basket for them, her eyes twinkling with poorly concealed delight at the development. As they set off in the light buggy, Georgina felt an unexpected flutter of excitement. This was the first time she and Kieran had done anything that might be construed as purely social, rather than work-related. He drove them along well-maintained trails through stands of oak and pine, pointing out landmarks and sharing stories about how he had acquired different parcels of land to expand the ranch. "This was all wild when I first came," he told her. "Took 3 years just to build the main house and get the first herd established. There were times I thought I'd made a terrible mistake." "What kept you going?" Georgina asked. Kieran considered the question. "Stubbornness, mostly, and a belief that this land had potential others couldn't see." He glanced at her. "Sometimes you have to trust your own vision, even when everyone else thinks you're a fool." They crested a hill, and Kieran drew the horse to a halt. Below them stretched a hidden valley, more lush and green than seemed possible in the August heat. A creek wound through it, widening into a small pond fringed with willows. "Oh," Georgina exclaimed. "It's like something from a storybook." Kieran smiled at her enthusiasm. "It's my favorite spot on the property. I come here sometimes when ranch problems need solving. Something about this place clears the mind." He helped her down from the buggy, his hands strong and sure at her waist. They unpacked the picnic under the shade of a massive oak that must have been centuries old. Mrs. Finch had outdone herself cold chicken, bread still warm from the oven, pickles, apple tarts, and a jar of lemonade. As they ate, Georgina found herself studying Kieran when he wasn't looking. The sunlight filtering through the leaves dappled his face, softening the usually serious set of his features. He seemed younger somehow, more relaxed away from the responsibilities of the ranch house. "Tell me something about yourself that I don't know," she said impulsively. Kieran raised an eyebrow. "That's a broad request. Something from before. Before Evergreen, before California." He leaned back against the trunk of the oak, considering. "I once wanted to be a doctor," he said finally. "I spent a year apprenticed to a physician in St. Louis when I was 17. "What happened?" Georgina asked, surprised by this revelation. "The drought hit our farm. My father needed me back home." His expression turned distant. "By the time the worst was over, the opportunity was gone. Then my father died, the farm was lost, and west seemed the only direction left to go." "Do you regret it, not becoming a doctor?" He shook his head slowly. "Not anymore. This life suits me better than a city practice would have. Out here a man can breathe." He looked at her. "Your turn. Tell me something I don't know about Georgina Adams." She thought for a moment. "I once cut off all my hair because a boy said girls couldn't be carpenters." Kieran laughed, a rich, unexpected sound that made Georgina's heart skip. "How old were you?" 7, she admitted with a smile. "My mother cried. My father tried not to laugh. The boy still insisted girls couldn't be carpenters, but I made him a perfect little box the next week just to prove him wrong." "Stubborn even then," Kieran observed, his eyes warm with appreciation. "Takes one to know one, Mr. Evans." Their gazes held for a moment too long, and Georgina felt heat rise to her cheeks. She looked away, focusing on repacking the picnic basket. "We should head back soon," she said, suddenly self-conscious. "Mrs. Finch will worry." "Mrs. Finch will be fine," Kieran said, but he rose and offered his hand to help her up. Their fingers remained linked a moment longer than necessary, and Georgina felt a current pass between them that had nothing to do with the summer heat. The ride back was quieter, each lost in their own thoughts. As they approached the ranch house, Kieran slowed the horse. "I'm glad you came to Evergreen, Georgina," he said, his voice low and sincere. "Whatever the circumstances that brought you here." She met his gaze steadily. "So am I." That evening, after Mrs. Finch had retired and the house was quiet, Georgina sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, unable to sleep. The day's outing had unsettled her in ways she hadn't expected. The growing warmth between her and Kieran was undeniable, but she couldn't help wondering if she was misreading his kindness or projecting her own developing feelings onto his actions. She was so deep in thought that she didn't hear his approach until he spoke from the doorway. "Trouble sleeping?" She startled slightly. "Yes. The heat, perhaps." Kieran nodded, though they both knew the evening was pleasantly cool. He hesitated, then asked, "Mind if I join you, please?" She gestured to the chair across from her. He sat, running a hand through his hair in an uncharacteristically nervous gesture. "I wanted to thank you for coming along today. It's been a long time since I shared that place with anyone." "It was lovely," Georgina said sincerely. "Thank you for showing me." Kieran studied his hands for a moment before meeting her eyes. Georgina, I find myself in an unusual position. When I brought you here, it was with the sole intention of offering you employment, a chance to rebuild your life after what happened in Murphy's. Her heart began to beat faster at his serious tone. Yes, I didn't anticipate. He paused, seeming to search for the right words. I didn't expect to come to value your presence here so greatly, not just as a housekeeper or Mrs. Finch's assistant, but as... He trailed off again. As what, Kieran? Georgina asked softly, scarcely daring to breathe. As a friend, he said finally. As someone whose company I look forward to, whose opinions I respect, whose smile brightens rooms that I never realized were dim. Georgina felt warmth bloom in her chest at his words. I feel the same, she admitted. I've come to care for you very much. Kieran's expression lightened with something like hope. Have you? Yes, she gathered her courage. Perhaps more than might be appropriate given my position in your household. He reached across the table and took her hand in his. The position was always secondary to your safety and well-being. If I've given you the impression that I see you as merely an employee, I've done us both a disservice. Georgina turned her hand in his so their palms met. What are you saying, Kieran? I'm saying that I find myself thinking of you constantly, he said, his voice deepening with emotion. I'm saying that when I ride out each morning, I look forward to returning because I know you'll be here. I'm saying that somehow, without my noticing, you've become essential to my happiness. Oh, Georgina breathed, joy threatening to overwhelm her. I know it's too soon, he continued hurriedly. You're still establishing your independence, finding your way. I don't want to presume or pressure you. But I wanted you to know how I feel so that if someday you might consider. That is, if you could ever think of me as Georgina squeezed his hand, stopping his uncharacteristic rambling. Kieran Evans, are you trying to court me? A slow smile spread across his face. Very ineptly, it seems. She laughed, the sound bright with happiness. On the contrary, I find your method quite effective. They sat there, hands joined across the table, smiling at each other like fools. Finally, Kieran cleared his throat. May I call on you properly then? Sunday afternoons, perhaps. We could take rides or read together, or simply talk without the context of ranch business. I would like that very much, Georgina replied, her heart full. Their courtship unfolded gradually over the late summer and fall months. Kieran made a point of respecting Georgina's position and independence, never presuming or taking advantage of the fact that she lived under his roof. Mrs. Finch, delighted by the development, appointed herself unofficial chaperone. Though her idea of chaperoning often involved conveniently finding reasons to be elsewhere. By the harvest moon in October, their feelings for each other had deepened into something neither could deny. They had shared their first kiss on a Sunday ride to their valley, a tender, reverent meeting of lips that left them both breathless and certain. Still, practical considerations remained. Georgina continued her household duties, though Mrs. Finch insisted on treating her more as a family member than an employee. The ranch hands noted the change in their boss. He smiled more often, whistled sometimes as he worked, seemed more at ease in his own skin, and approved of the match with their hard-working, kind-hearted housekeeper. As autumn gave way to early winter, Kieran began speaking of the future, careful, thoughtful conversations about what they both wanted from life. Georgina found in him a true partner, someone who valued her mind as well as her heart, who encouraged her dreams rather than dismissing them. I've been thinking, he said one evening as they sat before the fire in the parlor, Mrs. Finch dozing discreetly in a chair nearby. The east wing of the house has that large, unused room. It would make an excellent workshop. Georgina looked up from her sewing, surprised. Workshop? For carpentry, Kieran explained. You mentioned wanting to work with your hands again. I thought perhaps you might like a space of your own for it." The thoughtfulness of the gesture touched her deeply. "You do that for me." "I do a great deal more than that for you, Georgina," he said softly, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "I love you. I think I have since that night in Murphy's when you stood with such dignity despite everything happening around you." Georgina set aside her sewing and moved to kneel beside his chair, taking his hands in hers. "And I love you, Kieran Evans. Not because you saved me, though I'll always be grateful for that, but because of the man you are, honorable, kind, and far less gruff than you pretend to be." He smiled at that, then grew serious again. "I want to ask you something, but I need you to know you're free to answer honestly without concern for your position here or anything else." Georgina's heart quickened. "All right." Kieran took a deep breath. "Georgina Adams, would you do me the great honor of becoming my wife? Not because you feel obligated or grateful, but because you want to build a life together as equals, as partners." "Yes," she said without hesitation, joy flooding through her. "Yes, with all my heart." He pulled her into his arms then, Mrs. Finch's presence forgotten as he kissed her with a passion that spoke of long, restrained emotion finally given freedom. When they parted, both were smiling through tears. Mrs. Finch's gentle snore reminded them they weren't truly alone, and they laughed softly, still holding each other close. "I have something for you," Kieran said, reaching into his pocket. "I've carried it for weeks, waiting for the right moment." He pulled out a small wooden box, exquisitely crafted with inlaid patterns of lighter wood forming a delicate filigree across the lid. When Georgina opened it, she found a ring nestled inside a simple band of gold set with a single pearl. "It was my mother's," Kieran explained. "The box I made myself. I thought you might appreciate the craftsmanship." "It's beautiful," Georgina whispered, running her fingers over the intricate inlays. "Both are perfect." He slipped the ring onto her finger and they sealed their engagement with another kiss. They were married on Christmas Day, 1858, in the parlor at Evergreen. The ranch hands stood as witnesses, along with Mrs. Finch, who wept happily throughout the ceremony. The circuit preacher pronounced them husband and wife as snow began to fall outside, dusting the valley in white. The celebration that followed was simple, but joyous, a feast prepared by Mrs. Finch with help from the new Mrs. Evans. Music from a fiddle played by one of the hands, and dancing that lasted well into the night. Later, alone in the master bedroom that was now theirs to share, Kieran took Georgina in his arms with reverent wonder. "I never thought to find such happiness," he confessed as he held her close. "After Rebecca, after all that happened, I believed my life would be work and duty alone. And I never imagined that the worst night of my life would lead me to the best," Georgina replied, touching his face tenderly. "You didn't just save me from a terrible fate, Kieran. You helped me find where I truly belong." "Which is?" he asked, though he knew the answer. "Here," she said simply. "With you, at Evergreen." Spring came early to the valley in 1859. The ranch flourished under the combined care of Kieran and Georgina Evans. The workshop he had promised her became reality over the winter months, and by April, she was creating small pieces of furniture that soon gained a reputation in the region for their beauty and craftsmanship. Mrs. Finch, though she insisted on maintaining many of her duties, gradually accepted a more grandmotherly role in the household, especially when Georgina discovered in late summer that they would be welcoming a child the following spring. Kieran received the news with joy bordering on reverence, his hand gentle on her still flat stomach as he promised their child would never know the hardships either of them had faced in their younger years. On a perfect May morning in 1860, their son was born, Thomas Kieran Evans, named for both Georgina's father and his own. He had his father's blue eyes and his mother's determined spirit, evident from his first lusty cries. "He's perfect," Kieran whispered, holding his son with careful hands that trembled slightly. "He is," Georgina agreed, watching her husband fall instantly in love with their child. "Our family." As Thomas grew, so did Evergreen. Kieran's careful management and Georgina's financial acumen turned the already successful ranch into one of the most prosperous in the region. They added another wing to the house, expanded the herd, planted orchards that thrived in the fertile soil. Their family grew as well. A daughter, Rebecca Rose, joined them in 1862, followed by another son, James, in 1864. Each child brought new joy to Evergreen, their laughter echoing through the house and across the valley. In the spring of 1868, nearly 10 years after Kieran had first brought Georgina to Evergreen, they stood together on the front porch, watching their children play on the lawn as the sun set behind the western ridge. "You ever think about that night?" Kieran asked quietly. "In Murphy's?" Georgina leaned against his shoulder, secure in the circle of his arm. "Sometimes. Not with pain anymore, though. I've often wondered what made me go into that saloon that particular evening," he mused. "I'd meant to camp outside town, avoid people altogether." "Fate, perhaps," Georgina suggested. "Or Providence." Kieran kissed the top of her head. "Whatever it was, I'm grateful. You've made Evergreen truly a home." "We've made it together," she corrected gently. "Just as we've made this life together." They watched as Thomas helped little James climb the lower branches of the oak tree, Rebecca supervising with all the authority a 6-year-old could muster. The scene was so filled with ordinary happiness that Georgina felt tears spring to her eyes. "What is it, love?" Kieran asked, noticing. "I was just thinking about worth," she said thoughtfully. "That night in the saloon I was valued at $80. Kieran's arm tightened around her. "A ridiculous sum." "Yes," she agreed, turning in his embrace to face him. "Because how do you put a price on this? On everything we've built together. On love that grows stronger with each passing year. You can't," he said simply. "It's beyond measure." As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Georgina thought of the fireflies she had once believed were fallen stars trying to find their way home. Perhaps that's what life was, a journey of finding where you truly belonged. For her, it was here, with this man who had refused to let her be sold, who had seen her value when she couldn't see it herself, who had given her the freedom to become the woman she was meant to be. "I love you, Kieran Evans," she said, rising on tiptoe to kiss him as their children's laughter rang out across the valley. "And I love you, Georgina Evans," he replied against her lips. "Always." The setting sun cast one final ray of golden light across Evergreen Ranch, illuminating the house on the hill, the family on the porch, the life built with love and determination, a testament to the enduring truth that some things in this world would never be for sale.